Have you ever wondered how far you were going to protect someone you love? What limits would it exceed when pain becomes unbearable and justice looks like a distant mirage? Today I will share with you a story that few know, but which has remained buried in the shadows of American history. In Charleston, South Carolina, an enslaved mother faced the unthinkable when her 8-year-old son was brutally whipped to death by a merciless overseer. What happened later transformed not only his life, but also left an indelible mark throughout the region. The authorities tried to hide this story, but the whispers persisted through the generations. If you appreciate narratives that reveal uncomfortable truths about our past and show the unqualified strength of the human spirit, this account will deeply touch your heart. Follow me on this journey through the pain, anger, and revenge of a mother who lost everything except her determination. There are details of this story that have never been revealed before, and I can guarantee that the outcome will leave you speechless. The wind whispered between the remains of what was once the Willowbrook Plantation, 30 kilometers from Charleston. Today, only ruins covered by vines and the persistent aroma of magnolias witness the bloodshed on this earth. On full moon nights, locals say that it is still possible to hear the distant sound of chains dragging the floor and stuffy shouts cutting the silence. This is not just a place of ghosts. It is the stage where Sarah developed a notion of justice that was not in the 1843 South Carolina bill. Anyone who believes that only the powerful writing history does not know the desperate acts of those who have nothing to lose. When the pain goes beyond certain limits, a force is born that no current can contain. If you want to follow more cases like this, which move with all society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so as not to lose any investigation. The Willowbrook Plantation stretched by 500 acres of fertile land bathed by the Ashley River. Under the command of Colonel Jeremiah Hammond, it produced cotton and rice that enriched a single family while consuming hundreds of lives. In the big house, painted shining white with Doric columns ornamenting the facade, the Hammond organized balls and receptions for Charleston's elite. Less than 500 meters, 147 slaves slept in 22 windows without windows, each less than 15 square meters. The day began before the sun was born, announced by the bronze bell that issued a shrill sound capable of being heard even in the neighboring city. The women were raised first to prepare food, a porridge of corn served in collective gamelas. Children over 6 years old were working, carrying water, amazing birds, or assisting in the kitchens. In the months of harvesting, the work stretched until the last star appeared in the sky. The order was maintained by 3 white fans and 2 mashed captains. John Barker, the main overseer, always carried a 9-pointed whip made of raw leather braided with small pieces of metal at the ends. This instrument, which he affectionately called persuading, tore the meat with surgical precision, leaving scars that would never disappear. In the center of the set of cabins, an oak trunk served as a place of public punishment. The deep marks in Madeira told silent stories of suffering. Even on heavy rainy days, crops didn't stop. The enslaved worked with water by the ankles, while the overseers observed protected under impermeable covers. During the summer, South Carolina's suffocating heat turned the fields into open furnaces. The smell of sweat mixed with the sweet cotton odor created a suffocating atmosphere, he announced. Here, lives were consumed in the name of profit. Sarah was not like the others. Born in Willowbrook herself 32 years ago, she carried delicate features that revealed forced miscegenation so common in American plantations. His eyes, from a deep brown, watched everything with an intelligence that he had learned to disguise. While other women worked exclusively in the fields, Sarah moved between different spaces of the plantation. His skillful hands knew the secrets of the medicinal herbs that grew up on the marshy banks of the river. Hammond themselves resorted to their knowledge when Charleston's doctors failed to heal their seasonal fevers. Sarah learned to read hidden, observing the classes given to the colonel's children when he cleaned the library. Memorized Poggy in the whole of medical books when everyone slept, then applying this knowledge to relieve the sufferings of their people. Among the enslaved, he was respected as healer and counselor. Among the whites, he kept his eyes low and the submissive posture that guaranteed his survival. This ability to move between 2 worlds allowed you to have access to information and spaces forbidden to others. His son, Isaiah, inherited from her not only physical traits, but also insatiable curiosity. At the age of 8, he already knew all the secret trails that cut the property and could identify more medicinal plants than many adults. Sarah taught her the letters and numbers, using twigs to draw symbols that would be erased before dawn. Leave in the comments, never give up the truth, if you believe justice must reach all the oppressed. In January 1843, 3 slaves tried to escape using a small vessel hidden at the swamps, were captured before reaching the river. John Barker ordered them to be tied to the central trunk for 3 days, without water or food, while applying 50 whipping twice a day. When one of them faded after the second day, he was thrown into a common ditch still alive. In March, a 15-year-old was sent to the home of Colonel Hammond's eldest son. He returned 2 weeks later, silent and with an empty look. The following night, it was found hanging on a tree on the limits of the property. The body was burned without ceremony, and its prohibited name to be mentioned. In June, during an inspection in the cabins, Barker found a small doll made of straw under a straw mattress. Accusing the family of practicing African sorcery, forced the mother to burn the toy in front of her 4-year-old daughter before applying 20 whip to her wife. Sarah witnessed each of these events, keeping them as incandescent embers on his chest. Each night, while applying ointments to the torn back of the punished, a silent transformation occurred within it. Fear gave way to something more dangerous, the ability to coldly calculate the cost of freedom. On August 10, 1843, a scorching Thursday, Isaiah was sent to bring water to the northern field workers. On the way, he stopped to observe a bird nest hidden between the shrubs. The delay of a few minutes was noted by Barker, who dragged the boy by the arm to the center of the field. "I'm tired of lazy children who think they can do what they want," he shouted for everyone to hear. "Today I will teach a lesson that no one will forget." Sarah was 400 meters away, reaping herbs to Mrs. Hammond, when she heard the first scream. Something inside her immediately recognized her son's voice. He dropped the basket and ran toward the screams, but was detained by 2 workers who held her firmly. "You can't do anything now," one of them whispered. "It will only get worse for the boy." For 20 endless minutes, the whip sound mixed with the shouts that became increasingly weak. When they finally allowed Sarah to approach, Isaiah was lying on her stomach, her shirt in rags stuck to her back by a mixture of blood and earth. His small fingers still moved slightly, trying to grab the earth as if seeking anchoring in the world. Sarah knelt beside her son, without spilling a single tear. Deliciously, he turned his small, fragile body. Isaiah's eyes, those same curious eyes that watch the world with fascination, were now fixed in the blue sky, with nothing to see. A fillet of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. "He tried to run," Barker explained indifferently. "I needed to learn to respect authority." That night, Sarah washed her son's body with warm water and aromatic herbs. He combed his curly hair with his fingers and wrapped it on a white fabric he had kept for years. While women in the community sang songs in whispers, she remained absolutely silent. At dawn, when they bury Isaiah under an old walnut in the back of the property, Sarah cut a small lock of her own hair and placed her between her son's hands. "I will find you across the river," he murmured in his ear, before the earth covered him forever. It wasn't a farewell, it was a promise. The Willowbrook plantation was not only governed by John Barker. The oppression system worked in carefully organized layers. Colonel Hammond, with his aristocratic appearance and refined ways, rarely dirty his own hands. I preferred to delegate violence while dedicating itself to dinners and political agreements in Charleston. Thomas Hammond, his eldest son, was known for his explosive temperament and the pleasure he found to humiliate the enslaved during the monthly inspections that UE performed. Reverend Whitaker, who visited the plantation twice a month to minister the word of God, preached about obedience as he closed his eyes to the atrocities he witnessed. And there was Martha Hammond, the colonel's wife, who was proud of the human treatment she offered, allowing the enslaved children to play with the already discarded toys of their own children. His charity extended to teaching some enslaved to sew, not for their own dignity, but to produce more refined clothes to the Hammond family. 2 weeks after Isaiah's funeral, the Willowbrook plantation prepared for a special event. The governor of South Carolina would visit the property for a reception that would celebrate Colonel Hammond's 50th anniversary. Enslaved were designated to clean each inch of the big house and the gardens. Sarah, due to her special position, was called to help preparation of medicines for Mrs. Hammond, which she suffered from frequent migraines. While working in the small room attached to the main kitchen, he heard a conversation between Barker and Thomas Hammond. That incident with the kid. The governor can't know, Thomas said softly. I've taken care of that, said Barker. The mother is behaved. I implied that the other small of the plantation would depend on her behavior. Great. After the visit, we can transfer it to our property in Savannah. Better not keep someone who can hold a grudge. Those words sealed the fate of all of them. The event that would be the celebration of the patriarch Hammond would become the catalyst for what would be known in the official reports, such as the Willowbrook incident. 3 days before the reception, Sarah was ordered to help clean the shed where the agricultural instruments were stored. While organizing scythes, hoes, and mountains, his eyes landed on a curved blade used to cut sugarcane in the poor areas of the property. With a discreet movement, he hid it between his clothes. The next morning, during the distribution of daily tasks, Sarah was publicly scolded by Barker. Faced with all the other enslaved, the overseer grabbed her by his hair and spat on his face. It's been very proud here since losing her son, he announced with a cruel smile. You need to learn that you are no different from any animals on this property. Dragging her to the central trunk, he tore his dress on his back and ordered 30 whip. While the whip cut his meat, Sarah did not emit a single sound. His eyes remained open, fixed at a distant point, as if his spirit had already left that place. When they finally released her, her back was a map of open wounds. But contrary to what they expected, there were no tears or supplications. Sarah got up slowly, straightened the remains of her dress with dignity, and walked back to her cabin with steps. This one will try to kill himself before the end of the week, commented one of the other overseers. I've seen that look before. Barker just laughed. To try. It will only serve as an example for others. What none of them realized was that Sarah did not carry the look of those who had given up on life, but who finally decided how to use it. On the eve of the great reception, the Willowbrook plantation became a tingling of activities. Carriages arrived bringing supplies from the city. Cooks worked without stopping, prepared elaborate dishes for the guests. Slaved cleaned, poled, and organized every space that would be seen by the illustrious visitors. In the big house, crystal chandeliers were cleaned until they shone like diamonds. In the garden, lanterns were arranged between the trees to create a magic atmosphere for the night event. Charleston's band of musicians already rehearsed the waltzes that would animate the night. Meanwhile, in the enslaved cabins, a silent plan took shape. Sarah met with 3 trusted people: Daniel, an old fisherman who knew every inch of the river; Rebecca, who worked in the main kitchen and had access to food; and Marcus, a strong young man who had already survived 2 escape attempts. I don't ask you to risk their lives, Sarah explained softly. I just need a distraction at the right time, and then away to the river. You know what will happen if you get it, Daniel warned. It will not be a quick death. Sarah withdrew the curved blade from her clothes, now sharp until it seems like a razor. Death no longer scares me. He took my son. Now I will charge the price. Rebecca, who had lost 2 brothers to Barker's cruelty, slowly nodded. What do we need to do? In the following hours, details were aligned in whispers. The plan, which Sarah simply called reckoning, was divided into 3 phases: access, execution, and escape. While guests start advising to arrive, Sarah watched from the service area. Silk dresses, military uniforms, and sparkling jewelry paraded along the path illuminated by torches. Laughter and animated conversations filled the air of the hot night of August. No one noticed the fragile-looking woman who moved discreetly between the shadows, carrying a tray with imported wine bottles. The big house clock hit 9 o'clock. In the kitchen, Rebecca dropped accidentally a pan of boiling sauce, causing enough confusion so that Sarah could move to the stable area without noticing. There, as planned, he found Barker checking the horses of the most important guests. Mr. Barker, he called in a submissive voice. "Mrs. Hammond asked you to check something in the cellar. He said there is a problem with wine for the main gift." The overseer frowned. "Why didn't she send one of the house's servants?" "I don't know, sir. They just asked me to find him." Mumbling on the inconvenience, Barker followed Sarah to the small construction of stone adjacent to the main house. The cellar, partially excavated on the ground to maintain the ideal temperature, was illuminated only by some oil flashlights that created dancing shadows on the walls. "Where is the problem?" he asked impatiently. Sarah pointed to the bottom of the environment. "In the last shelf, sir. It looks like some bottles broke." When Barker turned to check, Sarah removed the hidden blade in her robes. The movement was fast and accurate, as if rehearsed 1,000 times in your mind. The blade found the overseer's neck in a single deep blow, opening a red smile that immediately soaked his white shirt. Barker didn't even have time to scream. His eyes widened in surprise and recognition when he turned to face Sarah. He tried to speak, but only a damp gang escaped from his cut throat. His hands grabbed the wound, trying to use the flow of life that escaped between his fingers. "This is for Isaiah," Sarah whispered, watching without emotion as he staggered and fell to his knees. "And for all the others you have destroyed." Barker collapsed on the cellar's dirt floor, his eyes still opened in an expression of unbelief. Sarah bent beside her, watching her life leave her body. There was no pleasure in his gaze, just the calm of those who had finally completed a necessary task. With her bloody hands, Sarah removed from the pocket of the overseer the small silver watch he always carried, the same watch he consulted as he beaten Isaiah. He kept it in his own pocket before cleaning the blade on the dead clothes of the dead. The cellar's silence was interrupted by 3 light knocks on the door. The sign combined with Marcus. Everything had happened as planned. The party continued. No one had noticed the absence of the overseer. Sarah was about 20 minutes before someone came to look for him. Leaving the back of the cellar, he found Rebecca with a bundle of clean clothes. Quickly, he exchanged his bloodstream dresses. Marcus was already waiting with a small hay-covered wagon used to carry supplies. Sarah hid under the roof as he followed a secondary path, moving away from the big house toward the river. Daniel was waiting for them on the bank with a small vessel. The old fisherman knew a route through the swamps that was rarely patrolled. "You have to go north," he instructed low. "There is a 3-day free black settlement. Look for Elijah Brown. He helped others before." Sarah hugged the 3 soon. "I will never forget what they did for me." "We didn't do it for you," Rebecca replied with a sad smile. "We did for all of us. Now go, before they find out." The small vessel silently slid down the dark waters of the Ashley River. Sarah paddled with determination, moving away from the Willowbrook plantation and the life she'd met until then. Behind her, the party light still shone at night, but would soon be replaced by search torches and dog barks. The news of John Barker's death spread like fire in dry straw. The body was discovered less than an hour later, when Thomas Hammond sent a servant to fetch the overseer to a special gift. The elegant reception has become chaos. The governor and the most important guests were escorted back to Charleston immediately, while Colonel Hammond organized search groups. For the first time in the history of the Willowbrook plantation, a touch of gathering was imposed. All enslaved were locked in their huts, except those selected to accompany the Matis captains on the hunt. Sniffer dogs were brought from neighboring properties, and rewards were offered to anyone who provided information. The morning after the murder, Colonel Hammond gathered all the slaves in the center of the property. His normally composed face was contoured by fury. "What happened yesterday was an act of war," he said in a trembling voice. The slave Sarah committed the most heinous of crimes, not just against John Barker, but against the natural order established by God. When captured, and will be captured, her punishment will serve as an example for generations. Meanwhile, in the big house, Martha Hammond supervised the preparation of Barker's body for the funeral. While the servants cleaned the blood from the cellar floor, she noticed something strange, a small piece of folded paper, partially hidden under a shelf. As he opened it, he found a list of 5 carefully written names. Barker's to head the list, followed by the names of the colonel, his son Thomas, the Reverend Whitaker, and finally, hers. The discovery of the list triggered a wave of panic among the Hammond. Armed guards were positioned around the main house, and urgent messages were sent to neighboring plantations warning about a possible slave conspiracy. Barker's funeral, held 2 days after his death, was a hurry ceremony, with few gifts besides the Hammond family and some nearby properties. While the hunt intensified, Sarah advanced through the swamps, using routes known only by the slaves who occasionally escaped to night meetings or forbidden ceremonies. During the day, he was hidden in densely wooded areas. At night, he was still guided by the stars as Daniel had taught him. On the 4th day after his escape, he was sighted by a patrol near the North Carolina border. What followed was a 3-hour persecution of the woods, ending when Sarah, trapped on the edge of a cliff, faced her persecutors with the same blade she had used against Barker. "Come," challenged the 5 gunmen around her. "I won't go back to that place." The first to advance received a deep cut on the arm. The second managed to unravel a blow that hit Sarah on the shoulder, but not before she crashed the blade in her chest. When the other 3 advanced simultaneously, Sarah was dominated, not without seriously injuring one of them. Tied and thrown over a horse as a bag of goods, Sarah was taken back to the Willowbrook plantation. The news of his capture spread rapidly, and a multitude of surrounding slave owners gathered to witness what promised to be a memorable example. In the center of the property, a special structure had been erected, not the usual trunk, but a high wooden platform, visible from all angles. The enslaved were forced to form a circle around, armed guards ensuring no one divert the look from what was about to happen. Sarah was dragged to the platform, her body already marked by abuse during the return. Even so, he remained erect, his firm gaze walking around the faces around. First those of the owners thirsty for revenge, then those of his captive companions, conveying a silent message of farewell and resistance. Colonel Hammond climbed to the platform, accompanied by the new Maine overseer and the Reverend Whitaker. Aloud, he read a list of crimes committed by Sarah, concluding with a solemn statement. "For these abominable acts against property, the divine order, and the laws of this land, slave Sarah will now be punished with death, as an example of fate that awaits all those who dare to rise against their legitimate masters." The method chosen for execution was deliberately slow. He began with public lashes, followed by the methodical breaking of the bones of his hands, the same hands that had wielded the blade against Barker. Throughout the process, Sarah did not make a single scream, her lips moving only in silent prayers, or perhaps in imaginary conversations with her lost son. When the executor finally prepared to give the fatal blow, Sarah gathered his last strength to pronounce words that would be recorded in the memory of all present. "You can destroy my body, but you can't erase what I did. Others will come after me, and Barker's blood will be just the first of many. My son awaits me across the river, and I go to him like a free woman." The silence that followed these words was broken only by the sound of the axe completing its final task. Many of the forced enslaved to watch closed their eyes right now. Others kept their eyes fixed, determined to witness to the end the courage of the one who had dared to challenge the system that imprisoned them. The owners hoped that the brutal execution of Sarah would extinguish any rebellion flame. The effect, however, was precisely the opposite. In the following weeks, resistance reports began to gear in plantations throughout the region. In some cases were subtle acts, mysteriously disappeared tools, harvests that burned in accidental fires, animals that inexplicably escaped from the surroundings. In others, the inspiration was more direct. 3 different properties were found dead in circumstances similar to the murder of Barker, accurately cut throats, with no signs of fighting. In each case, a small piece of white fabric, the same material used to envelop Isaiah's body, was left close to the victims. This specific method of retaliation earned a name among the enslaved: the cut of Sarah. Whispered in the huts at night, it became a symbol of hope and a warning simultaneously. For owners, it represented a growing nightmare that no security measure seemed able to stop. South Carolina authorities responded with an unprecedented wave of repression. New laws have been promulgated by banning enslaved from carrying any type of blade, even for agricultural work. Sarah's name was forbidden to be pronounced under penalty of severe punishment. Patrols were intensified, and the number of public executions increased dramatically. In Charleston, urgent owners' meetings discussed strategies to contain what they called insubordination contagion. Correspondence between governors of the southern states reveal increasing panic in the face of the possibility that Willowbrook's isolated case could inspire similar actions throughout the region. A confidential report sent to the War Department warned, "We are witnessing not only isolated acts of violence, but the birth of a systematic method of retaliation that threatens the very foundations of our Southern society." The official press maintained absolute silence about the events, fearing that the disclosure only spread the infection. In the northern newspapers, however, fragmented reports began to circulate, often mixing facts and legends about the slave who swallowed his oppressor, and began a wave of terror among the Southern overseers. The hunt for those responsible for the new murders mobilized extraordinary resources. Militia were formed specifically to investigate and punish any suspect. In November 1843, 3 months after Sarah's execution, the authorities announced the capture of a group of 7 slaves allegedly responsible for the cuts. After summary judgments, all were publicly executed. The executions, however, did not stop the incidents. New cases continued to emerge, spreading through areas increasingly distant from the Willowbrook plantation. As a whisper that gains strength when repeated, Sarah's story crossed invisible borders, brought by slaves sold to other properties, by traveling workers, sailors sailing along the coast. In December 1843, South Carolina authorities called for a special force composed of military veterans and experienced runaway slave hunters. Led by Major William Thornton, a former Army officer known for his relentless methods, the group has received explicit orders, finding and eliminating anyone connected to the cuts. For the next 6 months, Thornton and his men traveled the region by applying terror tactics. Cabanas were set on fire under the mere suspicion of housing supporters of the cause. Tortures were employed to extract confessions. Executions without judgment became routine in the most isolated rural areas. In a personal letter discovered decades later, Thornton confessed, "We are hunting ghosts. Each time we suppress a conspiracy cell, 3 others seem to arise in its place." The name of that woman has become a sort of profane silent in the senzalas. I begin to believe that we are no longer fighting people, but an idea, and ideas no longer bleed. On March 4, 1844, the search led Thornton to a small community of free blacks and fugitives hidden in the depths of the border swamps between the Carolinas. The settlement, known among its inhabitants as New Canaan, had been established years earlier and survived through fishing, hunting, and small hidden gardens. Among the community leaders was Rebecca, the same woman who had helped Sarah in her escape. Beside her, Marcus and other 27 adults, as well as 11 children, kept alive not only Sarah's memory, but also her resistance promise. The attack occurred at dawn. Thornton and his 40 men surrounded the settlement on 3 sides, leaving only the deep swamp as an escape route, a natural trap where they had positioned experienced snipers. The inhabitants of Nova Canaan did not easily surrender. Using makeshift weapons and superior knowledge of the Reno, resisted for almost 5 hours. Rebecca, armed with the same blade that Sarah had used against Barker, passed to her before Sarah's final capture, personally faced 3 strikers before being shot in the back. Falling to his knees in the mud, his last words, heard by a child hidden among the reeds, were, "The river is near. Follow north and tell our story." When the fight ended, 17 inhabitants of the settlement were dead, including Rebecca and Marcus. Another 9 were captured alive. The others, especially children guided by some adults, have managed to escape through submerged trails known only by local inhabitants. Thornton ordered the bodies to be burned and the prisoners be taken to Charleston for public interrogation. Among the items confiscated in the settlement, he found a diary where Rebecca had meticulously recorded each resistance act inspired by Sarah, each cut performed, each small victory against the slave system. The last page of the diary contained only 1 sentence, written in careful letters. "Sarah's method lives in our hands." When the prisoners were presented in Charleston, a crowd gathered to see the alleged responsible for the months of terror. To the surprise of the authorities, the captives showed no regret or fear. Erect, the firm look, in a posture that many observers compared to Sarah in their final moments. The trial, conducted in just 2 days, was a mere formality. All were sentenced to death. On the eve of the execution, the Reverend Whitaker, the same who had blessed Sarah's execution, visited the cells to offer spiritual comfort. It was received with an absolute silence that, according to reports, disturbed him deeply. The executions took place in Charleston's main square, transformed into a public spectacle to discourage future rebels. Each convict had the opportunity to say his last words. Most chose the silence. Just the last one, an elderly man identified as Daniel, the same who had organized Sarah's escape, said, "They can kill us all today. They can burn our homes and our bodies. But the fire that Sarah lit never goes out. She has shown us that we are people, not ownership. This truth will live as long as there is one of us breathing." The authorities considered the destruction of Novocainen and public executions as the final chapter of the conspiracy of the Cuts. Major Thornton received decorations for his service, and official reports stated that the threat had been eliminated. The reality, however, turned out to be more complex. Although incidents of direct violence have decreased in the following months, other forms of resistance continued to flourish. The children who escaped from Novocainen were welcomed by similar communities to the north, taking with them the stories and teachings of Sarah and Rebecca. In the spring of 1845, almost 2 years after Sarah's death, the Willowbrook plantation faced a series of inexplicable events. Whole harvests rotted in the fields. Animals died suddenly without apparent cause. Small fires break out in different places of property, always erased before they could cause significant damage. Not destruction, but warnings. Colonel Hammond, consumed by fear and paranoia, sold the property for a fraction of its value and moved with the family to the north, where he died 6 months later, supposedly from natural causes. His wife, Martha, spent her last years reclined, refusing to mention Charleston or any event related to the old plantation. Thomas Hammond, heir to family heritage, tried to manage business at a distance, but the reputation of the Willowbrook plantation had become so sinister that few agreed to work there even under threats. The property was finally abandoned in 1848, its structures gradually claimed by the lush vegetation of South Carolina. In the years preceding the Civil War, reports about Sarah and the cutting method circulated in various versions. For the Northern abolitionists, it became a symbol of heroic resistance, although often its history was romanticized and stripped of its essential violence. For Southern slave owners, he became a threatening spectrum, a warning of what could happen when control was loosened. Among the enslaved themselves, however, Sarah took almost mythical dimensions. Stories whispered in the senzalas spoke of how his spirit protected those who resisted and punished oppressors. Objects associated with it: a knife similar to the one you had used, a piece of white fabric like what had involved your child, a simple medicinal herb of the species that used to collect, became protective talismans. Coded songs, PR. They sprained their history in seemingly innocent verses. When the river runs red under the moon, the firm lady returns, her son waits on the other bank, and the overseer will not see the dawn. In some communities, especially those formed by fugitives in the marshy regions, an annual ritual was developed on the date of Sarah's death. In closed circles, in the light of small bonfires, its story was retold in precise details, passed from generation to generation as a will of human capacity to resist even in the most extreme circumstances. After emancipation, former slaves who established themselves in independent communities often appointed their daughters of Sarah, not only in honor of the historical figure, but as a statement of intent. These children would grow free, knowing that they descended from people who never accepted slavery as a natural condition. In 1876, during the celebrations of the centenary of American independence, a Charleston daily journalist decided to investigate the origins of what he called South Carolina's most persistent legend. His research led him to interview former Slavics, formerly overseers, and even some of the Hammond descendants. The resulting article, published in 3 parts, was the first detailed public account of Willowbrook events. Although contested by many as sensationalist, The text included details that only direct witnesses could know, suggesting that the journalist had managed to access sources close to the original events. The conclusion of the article remains remarkable for its unusual frankness for the time. Whatever the moral judgments we can do about Sarah's actions, an inescapable truth emerges from this investigation. The violence she employed was merely the reflection of the systematic violence to which she and her were subjected by generations. In a system based on the denial of humanity of one group, the recognition of this humanity, even though through desperate acts, represents not only a rebellion against physical currents, but premises that allowed their existence. By 1892, the exact place where the Willowbrook plantation was already became the object of debate among historians. Nature complained most of the structures, and conflicting maps made it difficult to identify precise. Still, residents avoided the area, especially at night, claiming to hear inexplicable sounds, the crying of a child, the crack of a whip, certain steps on dry leaves. An academic expedition organized by the University of South Carolina in 1897 was able to locate the remains of Casa Grande and some of the adjacent structures. Among the recovered artifacts was a small silver watch, severely damaged by exposure to the elements, but with the initials, JB, still visible on the back, presumably the same watch that had belonged to John Barker and that Sarah had taken as a symbolic trophy. The clock was donated to the State Museum, where it remained on display for decades as part of a collection about life in the antebellum period. Interestingly, museum officials often reported that the clock had unusual, though completely inoperative behavior, sometimes found in a different position from the one in which it was left, or produced soft, tissitish sounds at night when the museum was empty. In the first half of the 20th century, Sarah's history was gradually incorporated into the African American oral tradition, often adapted to reflect contemporary civil rights struggles. During the 1960s civil rights movement, activists occasionally invoked their name as a symbol of the long tradition of black resistance to institutionalized injustices. In 1968, an African American playwright presented in New York the play, The Method of Sarah, a poetic reinterpretation of Willowbrook events. Although criticized by some as excessively violent, production has received praise for its nuanced exploitation of the complex moral issues involved in resistance to systematic oppression. Archaeological excavations made in the 1990s finally identified the place where the Willowbrook plantation was accurately identified. Among the most significant discoveries was a small burial area, probably used by the slave of the property. One of the graves, marked only by an undressed stone, contained the remains of a child of approximately 8 years, involved in fragments of a white fabric preserved by the particular conditions of the soil. Forensic analyses revealed that the child had suffered severe trauma before death, with evidence of multiple lacerations on the back, compatible back. The dating situated the burial in mid-1843, coinciding with the period when Isaiah, son of Sarah, would have been killed. Today, the place where there was Willowbrook Plantation is part of a nature reserve. A small information sign briefly mentions the historical events that occurred there, though without detail about Sarah's specific history. Local guides, however, often share more complete versions with interested visitors. Each year, on the date that would correspond to the execution of Sarah, small objects appear mysteriously by the plate. Wildflowers, medicinal herbs, pieces of white tissue, or occasionally, a curved blade similar to the one it would have used. The park authorities have long given up to try to find out who leaves these offerings. In academic circles, Sarah's story is studied as a significant example of slave resistance, an important counterpoint to the narrative that portrays slaves as passive victims of an oppressive system. For historians specialized in the period, his case illustrates the complex dynamics of power, retaliation, and construction of resistance mythologies that permeated the institution of slavery. For many African American communities, especially those with roots in South Carolina, Sarah remains a venerated ancestor, not celebrated by the violence of her acts, but respected by the absolute refusal to accept the dehumanization imposed on her and her son. As a contemporary historian observed, Sarah's true importance is not in the physical act of killing John Barker, but in the symbolic act of complaining about her own humanity and that of her son through the only language that the slave system seemed to understand, the language of violence that he himself had institutionalized. What's if you watched so far, it is because you care about these stories that marked our country forever. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so that I can meet you and know who really cares about the search for historical truth. Like this video, if Sarah's story touched her heart, share so that Sarah's memory never is forgotten.